Before starting the project, I first selected different loops consisting of 8 channels for us. Since many of our friends use the light version of Ableton, as you know, there aren't many instruments in the light version. In fact, there are almost none. For that reason, I decided to progress through loops in this project, in this lesson. We had already conducted our lessons on working with warp and audio. If I quickly show you what I've done here, I've already set our project to 120 BPM. Here we have a kick loop. First of all, I want to start with this clip view. I want to start with the decay section that we mentioned. Then we move on to the other side, to the arrangement part, and a little bit about the arrangement. I want to show you what we've done. In general, what I did was this. The tempo is usually 120 BPM anyway. I selected tempo-based loops. To avoid too much hassle with the warp process, after placing each of them one by one like this, I ended up choosing F minor as the key of the piece. Again, mostly in F minor. I tried to select loops. For those that are not in F minor, as I previously showed, I selected the Complex Pro from the warp functions because we will be making a change related to the tonality. For example, for this specific loop, I lowered it by 2 semitones, meaning I pulled it down by 2 notes. So after bringing them all to a familiar state, we have a project that is basically ready to start. My other channels are currently muted. I want to start by listening to a kick loop. As you can see here, our loops are in the first row of the clip view. So if we press the play button in the first row that you see here, it will play all the loops for us at the same time. In other words, we are launching them. It will play at the same time, so we are launching them after placing the loops here. After placing each one by one. For the loop, we need to make sure that the loop option for the audio is clicked so that it can repeat continuously. Otherwise, it will just play once and stop. Now let's play our first kick loop from here. Very nice. Actually, it's not just a kick loop. It also includes some percussion elements. But I chose this kick loop because it has a nice groove in itself. If we activate this channel right after our second channel, I used a percussion loop here. Let's listen to both of them together. As you can hear, I use 2 different loops that contain a certain reciprocity that somehow progresses like a question and answer within themselves, so that a groove immediately emerges. Unfortunately, there is no Turkish equivalent for this term groove, but especially for this style. Focused on dance music, or actually all types of music, whether funk or disco, it's one of the most important concepts. So, what actually evokes the feeling of keeping tempo, accompanying, and maybe even dancing in a person is the groove concept itself. For this reason, I think it's one of the elements we should always keep in mind while building our track. Our third loop is immediately a piano loop. Let's hear this channel. It's a very simple piano loop. The first thing we need to pay attention to here is, when I play it, you'll notice that this is our master channel. It shows the overall level of all the sounds combined. So how much of all the total sounds, it's showing that we're at that level. It's already gone above 0 dB. We're at 244 dB, and here we see it in red, as you've always noticed. This is definitely something we do not want when making music in a digital environment, that is, through a computer. Therefore, we will always try to avoid seeing red or peaks in the master. Similarly, we need to make sure that these channels also do not exceed 0 dB. We will need to make a mix in total anyway, so that we can hear all the elements properly. Also, as you know, after the mixing we do, there is a mastering phase. Therefore, we need to leave a space here, which we call headroom, always not exceeding a maximum of 6 dB and not exceeding any more. so that we can leave room and space in the process where we will do the mastering later. This is completely related to the dynamics of the track. So here, we automatically have all our loops that are at 0 dB. After selecting by holding down the control key, we selected all the channels. We marked the channels. We can directly set them all to something like a 6. Or maybe even pull it down to a 9. It will provide us with more than enough headroom. Before we start mixing, let's say we have done a production like this. We used MIDI channels and audio channels after roughly creating a structure for the track. Before moving on to the mixing stage or before getting into the track itself, there's something we automatically start doing, and that process is called gain staging. Gain staging is basically about adjusting the volumes up front and is essentially a kind of preparation done for the mix. We select all the channels. When we directly lower it to -9 or -6 or to a level we have determined, we are already doing gain staging. Again, this is 3. When we hit play on our open channel, we will notice that we have left enough space in the master, as we can see here. Right away, as you know, there is, when we click on the numbers, separately for each one, the numbers above show us, it shows what we call the peak level tapping. As I mentioned earlier, we try not to exceed -6 in terms of peak as much as possible. Right now, our track has automatically reached a healthy level. We have a mix that doesn't exceed -7. At the point where the highest sound level is heard, but we're only using 3 elements right now. As we add the other elements in the track, meaning the other channels, we will see this going up again, because the sounds will be overlapping. And here we need to make our plans regarding the mix and the necessary processes. It will happen. Let's move on to the bass loop 4. Let's hit play again from here. As you can see, -4. Great. Let's listen to our next loop again. We've started to get down to -3. From here, we can immediately get the result. Again, we have selected our channels by holding down Shift with one button. Let's bring all of this down to -12. Because we will soon start arranging the track. In fact, we will start mixing and already a healthy level. Establishing this from the very first stage is important for us. Already, while deciding what should be at a high volume and what should be at a low volume and how we should place these, it will also serve as a guide for us. Let's hit play again after bringing everything down to -12. Nice. Again, -6s, -7s. An ideal. We've achieved the launch level. Nice. The next one. We've added a tambourine loop, one here. And right after that, we have a key that is our piano loop. This is the Bissint loop. And finally, we have a shaker loop from a percussion group as well. Let's hear this too. It's starting to rise back up to -3 again. Let's select all our channels again. And let's drop it down to -15. We're hitting play again. Now we're starting to hear all our elements layered together. -6, -7. Very nice and ideal level. So, we have completed the first stage, which is the gain staging part. Now let's start taking a look at the arrangement part, and the work we've done related to mixing as well. Let's select the clip here. Let's select it. Let's select all our clips again by holding down the Shift key. On PC, Ctrl-C. Let's make a copy by pressing Command-C on the Mac, then press the Tab key. This time let's move on to our arrangement section. The small play button you see here is orange. There's a conditional window. While this is active right now in the clip, it's playing the pieces on our other screen and indicating that we are getting a sound there. Like that there's a situation that's creating some confusion. If we close this, look, it became active here, all channels. So that means we are now ready to work on the piece in the arrangement section. Similarly, the things we copied, by clicking to come to the first channel again. If we do Ctrl-V or Command-V, all our loops, in a way that corresponds to each channel, we have placed it on our arrangement screen. If you hold down the Alt key and press one of the small arrows here, as you can see, it will minimize all the channels. I usually do the arrangement. I'm not starting directly from scratch like this, because later on I might need to add something to the front or back of the piece. On the other hand, it's practical to keep track of the length of the piece. As you can see down here, there's something like a ruler that shows us what minute and second we are at in the piece. Here, as much as possible 1. I'm trying to start from minute 1. Right now it's already 1. We've set the minute, as I said, maybe later when I want to add something to the front. To avoid facing difficulties like having to take everything from the very beginning and shift it to the right. Again, by holding down Shift, let's select all our loops. What we do is with Command-D or Ctrl-D, this way, one after the other. Actually, we're placing the piece in a way that all of them continuously flow. Let's say it's a total of 4. It will last up to a minute. Let's say we have a song that lasts a total of 3 minutes. Every topic in music production is actually like this. I mean, whether it's mixing, just like the gain staging we just saw, its arrangement is also a C in itself, and one of those subjects that has no end. Just like in the lessons I've done so far, what I want to show you here in this lesson is quite clear. The main concepts, first of all, I'm trying to create some familiarity. So, gain staging and the concept of lowness. Groove, for example, in the same way. These are words that don't actually have Turkish equivalents. Since we are doing work that requires a global language, we are currently working on a project or doing a job. We're either working on a project or doing a job. Right now, music production is such a thing. The play button is everywhere in the world. Play, stop, in the same way. The term record also applies in the same way. So, while trying to speak our beautiful Turkish as beautifully as possible, the English terms required by the profession, meaning the global terms, I will be using them in their original languages. Because, as I said, the goal is to create some familiarity. In arrangement, we usually make some decisions about what we call the structure. When it comes to arrangement, there are also many basic patterns we can follow. When it comes to patterns, we are actually talking about moving forward with more experimental things. But normally there is an ABC form. So, there's an introduction part of the piece, just like when you're writing the same composition. There is a development part that we call B and a conclusion part that we call C. In the broadest terms, the structure is arranged in these forms. The part we call the intro consists of 2 elements, the entrance of the piece and the outro, which is the exit at the end. But roughly, it's in the form of intro, A, B, C, and then outro. It's the simplest form of an arrangement structure. It might be possible to follow a structure, given that he's making a dance music track at 120 BPM. Assuming we are, as you can see at the top, we had our kick loop. Here's what we're going to do. Let's take out the other things we're using here. So our piece starts here. As you can see, each of our loops progresses in 4 bars, 4 bars. Since we generally work in a 4/4 time signature, in music, or rather, in terms of arrangement, what we're doing progresses in multiples of 4, so 4 or 8 measures or 16 measures, which is twice that. An intro section, and then an A section, which is again 8 bars or 16 bars or 32 bars, let's say the introduction sequence of the piece. And then again, there's a development section, B section of 8, 16 or 32 bars, and then here's a C section of the same 8, 16, 32 bars. And in the outro, there is an outro part that we decide on depending on the length of the piece from 8, 16 or 32 measures. We usually start with a single element in the intros, just like it is here. While the second measure is continuing here, it might be a good idea to bring in the percussion loop, for example. In the piece, we will actually try to create a composition that starts and ends in the same way, by placing the elements one by one in sequence, and then removing them one by one as we approach the final. In the first 4 bars, we only have the kick coming in. The last 2, 3, 4, and the last 2, and now the percussion loop has been added. Generally, the next thing we can follow is the bass loop. Let's move the next part up, or rather, this time from the third bar, starting from the measure. Here, after there are 4, 8, and 12 measures in total, there is also a melody element of our piece, for example. That includes the piano loop. So in the other 3 channels, let's start removing the elements, this time in the 4th 4 as bars. Great. I'm coming here right away. I'm right-clicking. Here, look, there's an option that says Add Locator. If we click on this, it will allow us to place markers here, meaning we can add markers. It will hurt. Let's call this part the intro right away. And let's also keep track of what we're doing in the arrangement part of the piece. 4 bars 2, 4 bars 3, 4 bars and 4. After 4 bars, meaning after a total of 16 bars, let's call this part A of our piece. So now the development. I apologize for skipping the intro part. Here we have our elements. As you can see, we have some unused elements. We have a synth loop. We have a tambourine, a shaker, and also a piano loop that we call a key. More precisely, a second piano loop. Here, let's also disable the other channels. So we've added a second melodic element to the mix. Continue, yes, now here. Let it continue. Yes, and here now, I want the shaker loop to kick in. Normally, all our beats up to this point will be 4 full beats, that is 4 by 4, while our shakers will be playing at 8 beats, that is, at twice the speed. And this way, I'm going to start adding a bit of movement to the piece. I want it to go for another 4 bars. So actually, if you look at it, I want to follow a structure where something is constantly being added or taken away in 8 bars, 8 bars, 8 bars. It continued. Here, for example, I want to make a small change right away. I will disable our kick loop. Let's keep our percussion loop. Let's keep our bass loop too. Piano loop. Let's keep it. Or let's remove the piano loop as well. Let's also disable the synth loop and percussion channels at the very bottom that we haven't used yet. Here we will actually be creating a small break. So it's like taking a break, because then we will move on to the section of our piece. Let's call this a break. Let's listen from here. Look, when you bring it up a bit like this, you'll notice that a speaker icon appears right away. When you click from wherever you want, it will play the piece from where you clicked. Example. Break. Great. Now we can move on to section B, where the arrangement of the piece is fully developed. And we can move on to the part where more elements are included in the arrangement. I want to use the second tambourine loop here. Let's bring the tambourine up a bit like this. I want to be using it. Let's bring the tambourine up a bit like this. Therefore this. We eliminated the synth loop. Let's move forward another 8 bars. So let's bring our speaker here again. The synth loop that we left off is actually what we call the lead. So, the main melody of the piece, or if there is a vocal in the piece, the lead becomes the vocal. Let's call this the lead loop. Here, let's take the main element of our piece within the arrangement. Here we have a total of, after moving forward, 16 bars. Let's do something like this. In general, there is a part in dance music tracks that we call a breakdown, or it can also be referred to as a build-up. For example, we won't be using a kick loop here. Let's do it like this. The percussion won't be the same either. There won't be a bass loop. We won't be using the piano loop either. Let's have playing from here. This is actually the part where we are building up the track. This is where we develop the introduction of our piece. This is the conclusion part, which will be C. We'll be moving towards the height section by gradually reducing the elements, just like we started by hearing all the elements together. Here in total. Let's hear all the elements again for 16 bars. Then let's add another 16 bars. And let's reduce the elements every 8 bars or every 4 bars. So here we've played the C part 4 times. Now let's think of this as moving into the outro. Let's call this the outro transition. Therefore, we will be taking the synth out of the mix as the first element that starts. So 7. In fact, it won't be in any of them after this. First, this one is out. Then we can take the tambourine loop out. So after playing for 8 bars, it's actually a lot like building with Lego, as you can see. Then our shaker loop is here. Here it is. After this point, the last 16 bars are gone. Our key loop is gone from here. Our piano loop, in fact. Let's not have it from here. Let's make a small change here in the 6th. Our bass loop is gone for the last 8 bars. Our percussion loop stayed with the kick. just like we did at the beginning of the same piece. Here, for example, we've made a 4-bar kick. Let's say we have a piece that ends like this.